It began with a dream. Elliot Thompson was never one for vivid dreams, but this one was different. The moment he closed his eyes, he was transported into a vast, endless expanse of stars, far beyond the reaches of any human telescope. It was not the familiar shimmer of the Milky Way, but a completely different cosmic dance, a rhythm to which he had no words. The stars pulsated in a slow, deliberate pattern, as though they were speaking to him. He could hear them, whispering, "You are the key," the voice in his head murmured. Elliot jolted awake with a gasp, his heart hammering in his chest. The early morning sun filtered through the blinds of his apartment, a stark contrast to the darkness of the dream. He was drenched in sweat, yet there was something lingering. The dream was so real, so vivid, that he could still feel the stars' pulse in his veins. He tried to shake it off, chalking it up to stress. Elliot had always been a practical man. A geneticist by trade, he focused on understanding the human body at the most intricate level. He had no time for fanciful thoughts about ancient civilizations or extraterrestrial whispers. Yet, there was a nagging sensation in the back of his mind, a feeling that the dream was more than just a random sequence of images. Something was calling to him, something he couldn't ignore. A week later, while working in his lab, he stumbled upon an anomaly. Elliot had been researching genetic mutations linked to certain human abilities, things like heightened senses or unusual brain activity, when he discovered something that wasn't supposed to be there. Embedded in a gene sequence he had been studying, hidden deep within the strands of human DNA, was a pattern unlike anything he had ever seen. At first, he thought it was a mistake, perhaps an error in the sequencing process, or a random glitch in the genetic code. But as he looked closer, he realized that it wasn't random at all. The sequence was purposeful, methodical, and symmetrical. It wasn't just genetic material, it was a message. And just like the dream, it felt alive. He ran a series of tests, comparing it to known sequences of human DNA, but nothing came close. This was something entirely new. The more he examined it, the more certain he became. This was not human. Elliot's pulse quickened. He couldn't help but think of the voice from his dream, the whisper that had called to him in the stars. "You are the key." His hands trembled slightly as he copied the sequence into a secure file, the beginning of an unraveling mystery that, if he were being honest, he wasn't prepared for. The implications were too vast, too terrifying to comprehend. But there was one thing Elliot couldn't deny: the message was real. It was then that the visions began. At first, they were fleeting, barely noticeable. A shadow in the corner of his eye, a strange symbol flickering across his field of vision when he least expected it. But as days passed, the visions grew stronger, clearer. They no longer were random flashes. They were vivid, almost tangible. Elliot could see ancient landscapes, towering cities built from materials that defied earthly knowledge. There were beings, humanoids with translucent skin, their eyes glowing like the stars. They moved with an elegance that seemed to transcend time, their faces etched with an expression of solemn determination. As the visions grew in intensity, so did the sensations. His senses sharpened to an unbearable degree. He could hear the hum of distant electricity, the faintest movements of people in adjacent buildings, even the thoughts of those closest to him. But the most unnerving change was what began to happen within his body. At night, when he closed his eyes to sleep, he could feel something within him waking up. A strange power, as though his very DNA was shifting, unlocking a hidden potential buried deep within him. The voice was there again, in his mind, but this time, it was louder. "You are the one. The time is near." Elliot stumbled back from his desk, his mind racing. What was happening to him? And what did the voice mean by "the time is near"? He didn't know the answers. All he knew was that his discovery was only the beginning, and the deeper he dug, the more certain he became that the fate of humanity, and perhaps the universe itself, was linked to the strange code embedded within his DNA. He was being watched. At that very moment, across the globe, others were beginning to experience the same thing. The first of many, a whisper, a vision, the stirring of something deep within. They were all receiving the same message. You are the key. And Eliot knew. He couldn't ignore it any longer. Whatever this was, it was happening to him for a reason. Something ancient and cosmic was awakening, and the only way to understand it was to follow the path laid before him. But as he reached for the file on his computer to continue his research, the lights flickered. A low, eerie hum filled the room, and for the briefest moment, Eliot could have sworn he saw a figure standing in the doorway. He turned. The figure was gone, but the message was clear. The universe was speaking, and Eliot had been chosen to listen. Eliot sat frozen in his chair, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. The figure he thought he saw standing in the doorway was impossible. He was alone in the lab. The building was locked up tight. The only sounds were the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant whir of lab equipment. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered, and with it came the undeniable realization that his life was no longer his own. The voice in his head had grown clearer since the dream, each day more urgent, more demanding. But what did it mean? And why him? He had always been just a geneticist, a scientist who sought to understand the biological world through logic and reason. What he had uncovered, however, was beyond any human explanation. He needed answers. Eliot pulled the file with the strange gene sequence back up on his computer, the string of code now seeming almost alive. He had spent hours examining it over the last few days, but nothing made sense. There was no known sequence like this anywhere in the scientific community, no pattern that could explain it. And yet, it was undeniably real. It was human DNA, yet somehow not. His hand hovered over the keyboard, unsure of his next move. Could he unlock this mystery, or was he too far out of his depth? Suddenly, the file on his screen flickered and blinked, and before he could react, the sequence started changing. It was as if the code itself had a will, an intelligence beyond anything he could comprehend. The letters of the genetic sequence shifted, rearranged, and formed new patterns. The voice echoed louder, now impossibly close, as if it were whispering directly into his ear. You must understand. The awakening has begun. Eliot gasped, pulling back in shock. His pulse quickened, and for a brief moment, he felt as though the walls of the lab were closing in on him. The air seemed thicker, almost charged with energy. And then, the pain began. It started as a dull ache in the back of his head, but it quickly escalated into a violent throbbing. His vision blurred, and he felt his entire body growing heavy, as though the weight of the universe itself was pressing down on him. Sweat poured from his skin, and his heart pounded in his chest. He staggered to his feet, gripping the edge of the desk for support. The pain intensified, and he could hear his own breathing ragged in his ears. Then, in a flash of light, the world around him shifted. He was no longer in the lab. Instead, he found himself standing on a vast plain beneath an unfamiliar sky. The stars above him seemed impossibly close, stretching across the heavens in swirling patterns that defied any earthly physics. Towering structures, unlike anything human hands could build, rose from the ground. They gleamed with an iridescent sheen, as though forged from materials unknown. There were no people, only the structures, towering and silent, waiting. Eliot turned slowly, his breath catching in his throat as the voice once again filled his mind, now a chorus of many, resonating in perfect harmony. This is where it begins. This is where we left our mark. He could feel the weight of the words, like an invisible hand pressing against his chest. The dream, the visions, had all been leading to this moment. He wasn't just witnessing these places and events, he was inside them. His mind had crossed some boundary, unlocking something deep within his DNA. It was then that he saw it. The central structure, massive and intricate, pulsating with energy at its core. And within that structure, faintly illuminated by the soft glow of the stars, was a symbol. The same symbol that had appeared in his visions, the one that flickered across his vision whenever the pain became too much to bear. The symbol seemed to beckon him, drawing him closer. You must come. Eliot took a step forward, feeling an unnatural pull, like the universe itself was guiding him. As he approached the structure, the ground beneath him began to tremble, the air growing thick with static energy. The pain in his head flared again, sharp and unrelenting. His knees buckled, and he collapsed to the ground, clutching his skull as the world spun around him. And then, as if someone had flipped a switch, it all stopped. Silence. The vision faded. Eliot found himself back in the lab, his hands shaking violently as he gripped the desk to steady himself. His breath came in quick, shallow bursts. He could feel the sweat soaking his clothes, the overwhelming sense of fear and awe still gripping him. What had just happened? Had he imagined it all? Or had he truly crossed into another realm, another place, one left behind by a civilization far older than humanity? He glanced at the screen in front of him, and the strange sequence of genetic code was still there, but now it was different. A new section of the sequence had appeared, as though something had been added to it, or perhaps unlocked. And in the center of that code, in the heart of the sequence, was a single word. Ascension. Eliot's heart skipped a beat. Ascension. The word echoed in his mind, filling him with a strange sense of purpose. Whatever this was, whatever he had unlocked, he was now part of something much larger than himself. And whether he wanted it or not, the road ahead would lead him deeper into the unknown. As the full weight of his discovery crashed down on him, Eliot knew one thing for certain. He was no longer just a scientist. He was a part of something ancient, something cosmic, and whatever was coming next could change everything. But who, or what, had left this message for him? And why? Eliot's world had been turned upside down. He had always prided himself on his rationality, his ability to solve problems, to find answers. But nothing in his life had prepared him for the inexplicable phenomena he was now experiencing. The visions, the cryptic genetic code, the mysterious symbol. Each piece was part of a puzzle that seemed to stretch far beyond human comprehension. He couldn't ignore it, not anymore. He stared at the screen, where the word, Ascension, flashed on the monitor. It was more than just a word. It was a promise, a call to action. What did it mean? Why had it appeared within his DNA? And why had his body reacted so violently to its presence? Eliot couldn't shake the feeling that he was no longer alone. The whispers in his mind had grown louder, more insistent. It wasn't just a single voice anymore, but a chorus, an ancient, collective presence that seemed to speak through the very fabric of reality. Each time he tried to ignore it, the pressure built within him, as if the universe itself was demanding he pay attention. He glanced at the clock, nearly midnight. The lab was quiet, too quiet. The hum of the machines and the low murmur of the air conditioning were the only sounds in the vast, sterile space. But Eliot didn't feel alone. In fact, there was something lurking just beyond the edges of his perception, something he couldn't see but could feel, a presence, like the eyes of an ancient observer fixed upon him. His fingers moved without thinking, opening a new browser tab and typing in the word, Ascension. As the page loaded, a chill ran down his spine. He had expected to find something about spiritual transcendence or religious references. But instead, the search results were eerily specific. Ascension Protocol. The Awakening of the Chosen Ones. The title was buried deep within a long-forgotten scientific paper, a document that hadn't been referenced in decades. It was dated 1978, and its contents were a mix of scientific jargon and inexplicable claims that seemed too wild to be true. The author, Dr. Evan Hartley, was a biologist who had worked on genetic experiments and research involving extraterrestrial life, though his theories had been largely dismissed as pseudoscience. Eliot clicked the link. The article was riddled with strange diagrams, molecular structures, DNA sequences, and images of the cosmos. One diagram in particular caught his attention. It showed a double helix, but the spirals of the DNA were formed by an entirely different set of base pairs than the typical adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. The code was alien, incomprehensible to modern science. Dr. Hartley's research was centered around the theory that humanity was not the product of natural evolution, but the result of deliberate genetic tampering by an ancient alien race. This race, as described in the paper, had seeded the Earth with their own genetic material in an effort to create a species that could serve as a vessel for their consciousness, an intermediary race that could bridge the gap between their kind and the rest of the cosmos. According to Hartley, the chosen ones were the descendants of this ancient manipulation. They were the ones who would inherit the dormant powers embedded in their DNA, unlocking abilities that had been dormant for millennia. When the time was right, these individuals would undergo an ascension, a transformation that would allow them to transcend their human forms and merge with the ancient race's consciousness, carrying out a final mission to complete the work they had started long ago. Eliot's breath caught in his throat. Was he one of them? Was he one of the chosen ones that Dr. Hartley had written about? The implications were staggering, but it made sense. His own experiences, the genetic sequence, the visions, the overwhelming pull to something greater. It was all connected. He quickly scrolled through the rest of the article, searching for answers, but most of it was too cryptic, filled with references to lost civilizations, obscure genetic markers, and long-forgotten texts. One line, however, stood out. The ascension is not a singular event. It is a process that begins with the awakening of the first chosen, and spreads across the globe as the others are activated. Their abilities will emerge in stages, often linked to their proximity to each other. When the time is right, the convergence will occur. Eliot's mind raced. The convergence. Was that what the voice had meant? Was that what the strange symbol represented? It was a call to unite, to bring together others like him. He needed more information. He needed to find these other, chosen ones. But where would he start? Just as he began to formulate a plan, his phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced at the screen, his heart sinking when he saw the name. Detective Laura Hale. Eliot had met Detective Hale a few weeks ago, when a series of unusual incidents had caught her attention. There had been reports of strange occurrences, people experiencing sudden, unexplainable abilities, like telepathy, heightened senses, and even the occasional precognitive flash. It was the kind of thing Eliot had written off as coincidence until now. He answered the call, trying to steady his breath. "Eliot, I need to talk to you." Laura's voice crackled through the phone, laced with urgency. "Something's happening. People are starting to change. And I think you're the key to understanding it." Eliot felt a chill race down his spine. This wasn't just about him anymore. He wasn't the only one experiencing these transformations. The convergence had begun. Eliot's heart raced as he ended the call with Detective Laura Hale. She hadn't said much, but the urgency in her voice spoke volumes. Something was happening, and he was at the center of it. He sat motionless for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. People were changing. Abilities were awakening. The convergence had begun, and he wasn't the only one who had been marked. Eliot grabbed his coat and left the lab in a rush, the cold night air doing little to clear his mind. He had to meet Laura. She might have more answers, and if what he suspected was true, she was involved in this as much as he was. The drive to the police precinct was a blur. His mind swirled with the implications of everything that had happened. The visions, the alien gene sequence, the strange power coursing through his veins. How many others were like him? And what would happen when they all converged? He knew the answers wouldn't come easy, but Laura was the closest thing he had to a guide at this point. As he walked into the precinct, he was met by Laura, who motioned for him to follow her into an interrogation room. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed as they passed through the corridor, the usual quiet hum of the building now filled with an unsettling tension. Inside the room, Laura sat at the table, her face drawn and weary. She hadn't gotten much sleep, that much was clear. She gestured for Eliot to sit across from her. "Tell me everything," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everything that's been happening to you." Eliot hesitated for a moment, gathering his thoughts. He had no idea how to explain what he was going through. How could he? The truth was so far beyond anything that could be understood by science, by logic. I don't know where to begin, he said, his voice low, almost reluctant to admit the gravity of the situation. I've been researching something in the genetic code. There's a sequence, hidden deep within human DNA, it's not human. And it's not just genetic code. It's a message from someone else. An ancient alien civilization, maybe. I don't know. Laura's eyes widened, but she didn't interrupt. She was listening intently, her expression focused. I've been seeing things, visions, places that don't exist, cities made of material that shouldn't be possible, beings, humanoid but different. And there's this symbol. It's in my head, in my DNA. And I'm not the only one. People are changing. Their abilities are awakening. Laura leaned forward, her voice sharp. You're not the only one? Eliot nodded. No, there are others, I'm sure of it. The visions, the abilities. It's all connected. The convergence is happening. The moment we've been waiting for is coming, and we're part of it. Laura's hand trembled slightly as she placed it on the table, the urgency in her movements betraying her calm demeanor. That's what I've been seeing too. People who are changing. And I don't think it's random. There's a pattern. I've been investigating a series of incidents across the country, where people are exhibiting strange powers. Things like telekinesis, clairvoyance, even the ability to manipulate electricity. It's all connected. I know it is. Eliot's pulse quickened. This was bigger than he'd thought. People weren't just awakening. They were becoming something else, something more. And he could feel it too, inside him, the power growing, the DNA shifting, unlocking abilities he couldn't fully control. The strange part, Laura continued, is that all of these incidents seem to be centered around certain locations, almost like there's a gathering place. But I don't know where. Eliot's mind raced. He had an idea. The symbol. The one that had appeared in his visions. The one encoded in his DNA. Could it be a map? A clue? What if the symbol is telling us where to go? Eliot said, his voice barely a whisper, but charged with an electric intensity. What if it's guiding us to the convergence point? Laura paused, considering the possibility. You think we're supposed to find this place? I think we have to. Whoever, or whatever, left this message, they want us to gather. We need to find the others before it's too late. Laura nodded slowly. I agree. I've been tracking reports, looking for anything that links these abilities, these people. I've found one thing that stands out. She slid a file across the table to Eliot. There's a small town in northern Nevada, near the Great Basin. It's been quiet, no unusual activity until recently. But a group of people, strangers, really, showed up there a few weeks ago. Since then, strange things have been happening. And I'm convinced it's connected. Eliot glanced down at the file, the names, dates, and addresses only fueling his suspicions. The pattern was there. The pieces were falling into place. We have to go there, Eliot said, his voice growing more determined. We need to find the others. We need to understand what's happening before it gets out of control. Laura stood up, grabbing her coat from the back of the chair. I'm with you. Let's find them. The two of them left the precinct together, stepping out into the night, where the cool air did little to ease the tension building inside Eliot's chest. They didn't know what they would find in Nevada, but they couldn't waste any more time. Every second counted now. The convergence was closer than ever. Eliot could feel it in his bones. The awakening was just the beginning. And the moment they all came together, they would discover something far greater than any of them could have ever imagined. The drive to northern Nevada was a long one. The landscape stretched out before them in endless, barren stretches of desert, where the horizon seemed to bend and disappear into the haze. Eliot couldn't help but feel the weight of the silence that hung over the car, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The closer they got to their destination, the more the air seemed to thrum with tension. Laura was focused on the road, her expression grim, as though the gravity of the situation was beginning to settle in. Eliot, meanwhile, had his mind spinning with the possibilities. What exactly would they find in this small, seemingly insignificant town? How many others had been marked? And what was waiting for them when they arrived? The file Laura had handed him earlier contained little information about the town itself. It was called Cedar Hollow, a place known for nothing more than its proximity to the Great Basin and its sparse population. The town's history was uneventful, as far as anyone could remember, and yet now, something was drawing them there. A pattern was emerging. People showing up out of nowhere, strange occurrences, whispers of people displaying abilities that shouldn't be possible. And then there was the symbol, the one that had appeared in Eliot's visions, the one encoded in his DNA. It was the key, he felt certain of it. Everything in his life had been leading him here. As they approached the outskirts of Cedar Hollow, the town came into view, a small cluster of houses, a few businesses, and a lone gas station. The roads were empty, the buildings standing still beneath the weight of time. There was an eerie calm about the place, as though it had been frozen in time, untouched by the world around it. "I don't like this," Laura muttered, her voice low as they slowed to a stop at the town's entrance. "There's something off about this place," Eliot agreed. The air felt thick, charged, as if something momentous was about to happen. They drove deeper into the heart of Cedar Hollow, passing by rows of vacant houses and abandoned storefronts. There were no people outside, no children playing, no cars parked in driveways. It was as if the town had been forgotten by time itself. They reached the center of town, where the town square was dominated by a large, old church. The building stood at the center of it all, its weathered spire stretching toward the sky like a silent sentinel. The church was the only building with lights on, a faint glow coming from within. It looked out of place, too clean, too vibrant amidst the decay of the rest of the town. "We should check that out," Eliot said, nodding toward the church. Something about it felt like the epicenter of whatever was happening here. He could feel the pull of it, the quiet hum in the back of his mind that always signaled the presence of something larger than himself. Laura didn't hesitate. She parked the car and they both got out, their footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night. As they approached the church, Eliot couldn't help but notice the strange feeling growing stronger within him. The same sensation that had accompanied him since the beginning, the sense that he was being watched. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. When they reached the church doors, they hesitated for a moment. Eliot reached for the handle, but before he could turn it, the door creaked open slowly on its own. "Guess they're expecting us," Laura said under her breath, a wry smile tugging at her lips, though it did little to mask the tension in her eyes. Inside, the church was dimly lit by a few flickering candles. The air was thick with dust and incense. Rows of pews lined the sides of the room, facing a large altar adorned with symbols Eliot didn't recognize, strange geometric shapes, almost like a combination of ancient runes and the symbol he had seen in his visions. It was unmistakable. At the far end of the church, a figure stood in front of the altar. Tall, cloaked in a dark robe, the figure's face was obscured by a hood. The moment Eliot stepped into the room, the figure turned, slowly, as if expecting them. Its eyes glowed faintly beneath the hood, a soft, unnatural light that made Eliot's heart skip a beat. "You've come," the figure spoke, its voice echoing through the silent room. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Eliot's breath caught in his throat. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure took a step forward, its movements smooth and deliberate. "I am one of the Watchers," it said. "We have been waiting for you." Laura stepped forward, her hand instinctively reaching for her gun, though she didn't draw it. There was something about this figure that made her instincts scream to be cautious. "Waiting for us?" she asked, her voice hard. "What does that mean?" The figure raised a hand, gesturing toward the symbols on the altar. "You are the chosen ones," it said, the words heavy with ancient authority. "You have awakened, as you were always meant to. But you are not the only ones. There are others, scattered across the world, each marked by the same symbols. You will all converge here. The time has come. Eliot's heart raced. This was it. The purpose of everything. The convergence. But what did it mean? What were they supposed to do now? Why? Eliot asked, his voice shaky despite his best efforts to remain calm. Why us? Why now? The figure paused, its glowing eyes narrowing. Because the Ancient Ones are coming. The time to ascend is near. And you, the chosen, will lead the way. Eliot felt a cold wave wash over him as the figure spoke. The air grew even thicker, the weight of the words pressing down on him. The Ancient Ones, ascension, lead the way. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet trembled. The faint hum that Eliot had been feeling, the one that had always lingered in the back of his mind, grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't just the church. It was the town. It was everywhere. And then the voices started. Hundreds, no, thousands, of voices filled the space around them, not spoken aloud, but in their minds. It was overwhelming. The words were unintelligible at first, but Eliot felt the presence of something vast, ancient, and powerful. The Watcher raised its arms, and the voices stopped as suddenly as they had begun. It is time, the figure said. And Eliot knew it was true. Something had been set into motion. The convergence had begun in earnest, and they were no longer just observers. They were participants in something far larger than anything they could comprehend. The awakening was no longer just about discovery. It was about survival. The air in the church was thick, suffocating, as if every molecule had been charged with the weight of an impending storm. Eliot could feel it in his chest, a pressure building that made it hard to breathe, as though the very fabric of reality was shifting around him. The figure, the Watcher, stood before them, its presence emanating a quiet, almost serene power, but it was clear that this wasn't a calm before the storm. It was the storm itself. Laura's hand was still near her gun, but she didn't draw it. Something about the Watcher, its calm, deliberate movements, told her that force wouldn't help here. Instead, she stood back, watching the figure intently. Eliot could see the same unease in her eyes that he felt himself. The convergence, Eliot said, his voice shaky. What does it mean? What happens when it's complete? The Watcher's glowing eyes fixed on him, and the silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, the figure spoke. The convergence is not a singular event. It is a series of awakenings, each one bringing the chosen individuals together. And when the last of you is gathered, when all the pieces have fallen into place, the Ancient Ones will return. They will guide you to the ascension. Eliot's head spun. He wanted to understand, to make sense of the cryptic words, but the more the Watcher spoke, the more elusive the answers became. And the ascension? Laura asked, her voice tight. The Watcher's lips barely moved, but Eliot could feel the response deep in his bones. It is the transformation, the ultimate goal. Those who ascend will become something beyond human, something eternal. You will carry out the final purpose of the Ancient Ones. You will bridge the gap between worlds. Eliot felt a chill crawl down his spine. This was bigger than just genetic manipulation. This wasn't just about powers awakening in them. It was about something far more dangerous. If the Ancient Ones had their way, everything he knew would be irrevocably changed. Why us? Eliot asked again. Why are we the chosen? The Watcher's eyes flickered. You were always meant to be. The DNA, the message encoded within you. It has been passed down through generations, hidden in the bloodlines. You are the inheritors of this ancient legacy. But not all will ascend. Not all will survive the process. The choice will be made as the final moment draws near. Laura stepped forward now, her voice determined. And what happens to those who don't survive? What happens to the ones who can't ascend? The Watcher's face remained unreadable, but Eliot felt an unmistakable weight in its gaze. They will be left behind, lost to the void. A cold silence fell over the room as the implications of those words sunk in. The chosen were being called for a reason, and only those who could endure the transformation would make it to the end. But what of those who couldn't? What of the ones who failed? The fear in Eliot's chest gnawed at him, but he pushed it aside. He had to focus. He had to understand more. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet trembled again, harder this time. The walls of the church seemed to groan with an unnatural vibration, and Eliot could feel the air around them growing thicker. The whispers, the same voices that had filled his mind earlier, began again, louder now, more insistent. They were saying something, but it was in a language that made no sense. The words felt alien, as though they weren't meant for human ears. Eliot staggered back, his hand instinctively reaching for Laura, who was watching the walls warily, as if she, too, could sense the building pressure. "The others are coming," the watcher said, its voice reverberating in the room. "You are not the only ones who have awakened. The others are drawn to this place as well. You must find them before it is too late." "But where are they?" Laura asked, her eyes darting around the church as if expecting the others to emerge from the shadows. "They are scattered," the watcher replied. "Across the world. Some are already aware of their purpose. Others still sleep. You must reach them before the time runs out." The tremors intensified, the air now so thick with energy that it felt as though the church itself might collapse. Eliot's vision blurred slightly, the overwhelming sensation of being pulled towards something far greater than himself nearly consuming him. "Do you know where they are?" Eliot asked, trying to steady his breath. The watcher's glowing eyes flickered. "Yes, but time is running short. The ascension must happen soon. You have no more time to waste." Suddenly, the front doors of the church burst open with a deafening crash, as though the very forces of the universe had torn them from their hinges. A gust of wind swept through the room, carrying with it a strange, ethereal light that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. Figures emerged from the shadows, people, but not quite. Their eyes glowed with the same unnatural light as the watcher, and their bodies seemed to ripple with a strange energy. They were the others, the chosen. Eliot felt a strange sense of recognition, a connection that he couldn't explain, as if he had always known them. But they weren't the same as him, not completely. They were different, their energy more intense, their presence more commanding. It was as though they had already begun their transformation. "Are they?" Eliot began, but the watcher interrupted. "They are here," it said, its voice somber. "But their journey has already begun. They have begun to ascend." The figures that had entered the church moved toward the altar, standing in a circle, their bodies glowing with a brilliant light that filled the room with an almost unbearable radiance. Eliot's body tensed, and he reached out, his hand shaking as he tried to comprehend what was happening. The watcher's voice broke through his thoughts. "It is time for you to choose, Eliot." Eliot turned to the watcher, his heart pounding in his chest. "Choose what?" "Choose if you are ready to join them," the watcher replied. "The ascension will begin soon. Those who are not prepared will be left behind. You must decide now." Eliot's mind raced. The other chosen were standing before him, glowing with power, ready to begin their transformation. But was he ready? Did he want to join them? Did he understand the consequences? And what about Laura? Would she be left behind? Would she even survive what was to come? The choice before him was more than just about power. It was about survival. It was about becoming something more. But would it be worth it? With the light in the room growing ever brighter, Eliot knew that the time to make that decision was now. And once made, there would be no turning back. The air in the church crackled with energy. Eliot stood at the edge of the circle, his pulse pounding in his ears as he watched the others, the chosen, glow with an almost otherworldly radiance. Each one of them seemed to be vibrating with power, their bodies shimmering in the dim light like phantoms caught between worlds. He could feel the pressure building around him, pulling him toward them, urging him to join, to become part of what they were about to experience. But something within him hesitated. The watcher had said that the ascension was a transformation, that it would change them, elevate them. But at what cost? He had no idea what this transformation truly entailed. Was it worth it to become something more, to cross into the unknown, when there was still so much about this mysterious process that he didn't understand? And then there was Laura. She stood at his side, her eyes locked on the glowing figures before them. Her expression was unreadable, but Eliot could feel her inner turmoil. She wasn't chosen. She wasn't part of this world. But that didn't mean she wasn't tied to it. She had been with him through every step of this journey, and in a way, she was as much a part of this as he was. Eliot, Laura's voice broke through his thoughts, low but firm. We can't do this, not without knowing what it really means. You're talking about a transformation, a complete change. We don't even know if we'll survive it. These people, she motioned to the glowing figures, they're not the same anymore. Are you ready to give up everything for something we don't fully understand? Eliot turned to her, his eyes filled with uncertainty. I don't know, but the Watcher, these visions, they keep pulling me toward this moment. It feels like this is the only way to find out what's really going on. If I don't go through with this, I might never understand it. I might never know what we're meant to do. Laura's face softened, her hand resting lightly on his arm. But what if it's a mistake? What if we're being manipulated into something we can't control? What if we're not the ones who are supposed to lead the ascension, but just pawns in a game far bigger than us? Her words struck him deeply, echoing the very doubts that had been swirling in his mind since they arrived in Cedar Hollow. The Watcher had said they were the chosen, but was that enough? Was that truly a privilege or a curse? The others, those already glowing with the light of the ascension, stood motionless, their faces unreadable. Eliot could feel the pull of their power, the allure of what they represented. It was as if they had already crossed some invisible line into another existence, one that transcended human limitations. But in that moment, as the light pulsed around them, Eliot saw something else, a flicker of something he hadn't noticed before. Fear. It was brief, a fleeting shadow in their eyes, but it was there. The others weren't at peace. They weren't serene or blissfully unaware of the cost. They, too, were afraid. Eliot turned back to the Watcher, who had been watching silently from the altar, its glowing eyes never leaving him. The Watcher had not spoken since it had told him to choose, but its presence loomed like a heavy fog in the room. Why are they afraid? Eliot asked, his voice steady, but filled with a sense of resolve. These others, why'd I see fear in their eyes? The Watcher tilted its head, and for a moment, Eliot could swear it almost seemed pained. Fear is an inevitable part of transformation. The ascension is not without cost. Even the chosen must sacrifice something to reach the next stage. You will see it in their eyes, too, once the process begins. They fear the unknown, as you do. But you must decide, Eliot. If you wish to ascend, you must make the choice now. The moment is fleeting, and it will pass. Eliot's heart raced as he stared at the Watcher. The urgency was palpable, suffocating. The time for hesitation was ending. He could feel it. The moment was upon him. But the Watcher's words rang true. The others were afraid. That fear was what made him pause. They had already made their choice, yet it didn't seem like an easy decision. He looked back at Laura. She was still standing beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, a silent anchor in the storm of his thoughts. He could feel the weight of her trust, her hope, and her fear. She had always been with him, but now, in this moment, it was clear that the decision ahead would not just affect him. It would affect both of them. I don't know what's going to happen, he said, his voice quiet but determined. But I need to find out. I need to understand this. We need to know what's really going on, Laura. And maybe if I don't take this step, I'll never have the chance to understand, to stop it, if it's wrong. Laura hesitated for a moment, searching his face. The light from the other chosen cast long shadows, and she looked almost fragile in its glow. Then, finally, she nodded. I trust you, she said softly. But don't forget, Eliot, you're not alone in this. Whatever happens, we face it together. Her words were a lifeline, and in that moment, Eliot felt a surge of resolve. This was it. This was the path he had been walking toward all along, even if he didn't fully understand it. The ascension, the transformation, the convergence, They were all part of something larger than himself. And while he couldn't predict what would come after, he knew that turning back wasn't an option. The Watcher stepped forward, raising its hand slowly as the light in the church grew even brighter. "It is time," it said. "The choice is yours, Eliot. Will you ascend?" Eliot looked at the figures gathered before him, their bodies now nearly blinding in their radiance, and felt a deep pull in his chest. The symbol, the visions, the whispers, they had all led him here. Everything had been guiding him toward this moment. He stepped forward, his heart steady despite the storm of thoughts in his mind. "Yes," he said, his voice firm. "I'm ready." And as the words left his lips, the light around him exploded in a brilliant flash, washing over him like a wave. He felt the power surging through him, his body trembling, every cell alive with energy, as if the very fabric of his being was being rewritten. But even as the transformation began, one thought remained in his mind. What if this wasn't the end? What if this was just the beginning? The ascension is complete, but with it comes new questions, new challenges. What will happen now that the chosen have transcended? Will Eliot and Laura uncover the true purpose behind the Ancient One's return? The story may be over for now, but the journey is far from finished.